Right, Dr. Stephen Mjay here. In this recording, I'm going to be configuring what is known as router on a stick. And this is a concept that allows you to configure sub interfaces on a switch or virtual interfaces. Well, virtual interfaces or sub interfaces, that's the same thing, right? So it allows us to configure sub interfaces on a single physical interface. So I have this interface on the router, gigabit 00, right? So one interface, but I'm going to configure it so that it can allow inter-VLAN routing. In this topology, on the switch, I have two VLANs created. So if I get on the switch, I can show you the VLANs that I have. I'll have enable, and then I'll run the command show VLAN. Right, so you can see I have added these two VLANs. Cells, VLAN number 10, it has two interfaces, fast Ethernet 01 and fast Ethernet 03. And then I also have the production VLAN 20 with two interfaces connected to it, fast Ethernet 02 and fast Ethernet 04. So two separate VLANs. And of course, this allows us to implement the concept of segregation. We have segmented our network using VLANs. The traffic on the cells VLAN is isolated, it's segregated, it's separated from the production traffic. But if we want those two to connect, we do need a layer 3 device. And that is what can allow the cells PCs to connect or communicate with the production. Otherwise, without a layer 3 devices, those are not going to be able to communicate, right? And the traffic will be separated. So using this router, I am going to configure that concept of a router on the switch that allows us to connect different VLANs, right? So I'll go to the command prompt on here and I'll do no, I'll type enable and then config T. I can change my host name for the router, but I'm going to create the first sub interface for the first VLAN, and I'll use interface G00, right? But this is not enough because it's a sub interface. It's a virtual interface that I am creating, and I'll follow that by the dot. Best practice is to use the VLAN that you are trying to put on that sub interface. So I'll put that 10, it's interface gigabit 00.10. I'll hit enter, right? And the moment I do that, notice it's displaying sub if for sub interface. That's the router knows that this is a virtual interface. It's not a physical, it's a virtual interface that is going to be used by the devices that are on the cells interface. And then after that, I need to type encapsulation. I can simply go by encap dot 1Q. This is the protocol that is used by VLANs by trunking. So I'll do that 1Q10, right? And then after that, I specify the IP address range, the IP addresses that are going to be used by that VLAN. And how I did this is I created two interfaces. I subnetted the 192.168.1.0, excuse me, into two subnets and giving me 2/25 networks, right? So the first one is going to be 192.168.1.0. Actually, I will start with one for the default gateway. And then that's going to be the IP address for that sub interface, not the network ID, but the IP address for the sub interface. And then the subnet mask is going to be 255.255.255.128 because this is a /25. And then after that, I'll hit enter. Oh, okay, I see what happened. I went a little bit ahead of myself. I was supposed to type in IP address. Okay, so I was missing that command IP address. And then now that has been configured. So this is the IP address that is assigned to the sub interface, 192.168.1.1. All right. And then after that, I can go into the second sub interface that I'm going to configure on here, which is going to be interface gigabit Ethernet 00.20 for the second VLAN, right? And the moment I do that, of course, it took me into the second sub interface, the virtual sub interface. It's not physical, as I mentioned. And then, of course, I'll press the up arrow so I can go back to the encapsulation.1Q. This is going to be 20 for the second VLAN, which is at the cells. And in terms of my IP address for that sub interface, the subnet mask is not going to change, but the IP address, remember with /25, I am going all the way to 127. And then the next ID is going to be 192.168.1.128. And then 129 is the first usable IP address for the /25. So I'll say IP address 192.168.1.129. That's the first usable IP address. My subnet mask stipulates that this is a /25. I'll hit enter. So that sub interface, the second sub interface, has been created on the router. And then after that, I'll do interface G00, right? So now it has taken me outside of the sub interface into the physical interface, which is interface G00. And notice it doesn't say sub, it simply says if for the interface. And then after that, the last thing I'll do is no shut. All right. And as you can see, that interface is turning on, the physical interface. But the router already knows that it has two sub interfaces on there because to represent the two VLANs that I have, right? So now this is a layer 3 device, as I mentioned. So I'm configuring router 3 on a router on a stick on a router, because this is something that can be done on a layer 3 device. And these are the commands that I did. Now I can enable inter-VLAN routing. I can now, the sales PCs, of course, should be able to talk with the production PCs, because when traffic comes from the sales PC going to the router, it knows where it's supposed to go. All right, so that would be all in this recording. This is how you configure router on a stick, I should say, which enables inter-VLAN routing. And as always, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. Remember to like and subscribe so that you'll be notified each time I have a new video. Thank you.